So why would a company choose to use ABC costing versus traditional costing? Well, there are problems that come with traditional costing. One, its typical allocation based includes direct labor hours or machine hours. And what that does is it's assuming that all manufacturing overhead is dependent on either one of those two. This assumes that all overhead costs are proportional to the production volume. And that's not necessarily the case for everything. When overhead costs are not proportional to the production costs, which most manufacturing overheads are in total, a couple things could happen. First, when you're dealing with a high volume product, you're going to tend to overcost that. Adversely, when you're dealing with a low volume product, you're going to tend to undercost it. So when you're dealing with traditional costing, if you don't separate the things that are proportionate to the volume and those that's not proportionate to the volume, then you're going to come up with these issues. You're going to tend to either over or under cost. ABC costing corrects this problem by using either batch level or product level costs and their appropriate batch and product cost drivers. So we're looking at cost drivers that are more proportionate to whatever that activity is versus allocating one based on a single base. So let's look at an example of this. Okay, so if we're looking at the difference between the two, we have a small and a large. The small is 4,000 units being produced. The large is 9,500 units being produced. The small represents the low volume. The large represents the high volume. If we're looking at it from a traditional method of applying MOH, meaning we lump everything together, we use one single base to allocate it, then our manufacturing overhead ends up being calculated as $9.85 per unit for the small and $29.55 for the unit. Now, if we do the exact same problem, but using the activity-based costing method, then we find that our manufacturing overhead applied is $22.48 per unit versus $24.23 per unit for the large. Now, look at the discrepancies between the products in each of the types, the small versus the large. The small, we went from costing $9, almost $10 per unit, to actually costing about $22.50 per unit. We significantly undercosted this based on using the traditional method, the low volume. Whereas on the large side, we were allocating, using the traditional method, almost $30 per unit. But in reality, if we use the ABC method, which is essentially more accurate, we're actually only supposed to be costing less than $25 per unit. So as you see, when we're dealing with this, the traditional method is going to underapply the MOH, the product cost, potentially leading to underpricing. If we think it's going to cost us less, then we're probably going to price it out less. But in reality, it doesn't change. Our actual cost is much, much higher. Versus, on the other side, if we over apply MOH, if we overcost, that's going to lead to potential overpricing, which means people are not going to necessarily buy our product. We could actually be pricing it at a more competitive rate. So these are the issues that come with using traditional costing. Though it is easier, or more straightforward, it's not necessarily the most accurate. ABC is going to define those things a little bit more accurately. They're going to individualize them, and the more detail we get, the more accurate we become.